Okay, the next problem on the list is M114. M114 gives us three companies: Amazing Corp, Bestech, and Colossal Corp. And it asks us to solve for the missing data. And in order to solve for this missing data, you really just need to know the equations for the basic financial statements that we'll talk about. I'll write them up here so that we can get familiar with them as we move along in the problem. First one is income statement. Revenues minus expenses equals net income or net loss. If expenses were more than revenues, you would have a net loss. We'll just assume we have net income for right now, okay? And if that changes, we'll change our equation. Next one you need to know is the balance sheet equation. This one is assets equals liabilities plus stockholders' equity. And again, I'm abbreviating just using the first letter of each of the words here. So assets equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity, okay? The next one we want to know is the statement of retained earnings. Statement of retained earnings is beginning balance. Beginning balance of what? The beginning balance or the starting balance for retained earnings, okay, plus net income minus dividends. And this equals the ending balance. Ending balance in what? Ending balance in retained earnings. Okay, so this is for retained earnings. One other brief thing that I want to mention: stockholders' equity. We can break those out into two parts. Okay, contributed capital and retained earnings. Notice real briefly how each one of those financial statements work together, right? Net income is a component of retained earnings. It will, in chapter 4, we'll talk about it will close to retained earnings. It will go into retained earnings, okay? Notice that retained earnings right here, because all of this, that equals the retained earnings, the statement of retained earnings, okay? This is a portion of stockholders' equity. Stockholders' equity is contributed capital and retained earnings. So this goes into here, okay? So all these financial statements are interconnected, and your book talks about that, and we mentioned it over the lecture, but I just want to bring your attention back to that here. So with this information, we should be able to solve for the companies here. So let's do A, B, and C. A asks us to solve for net income. So for net income, we need two things. First, we need revenue, and then we need expenses. Well, it gives us that in the problem here. It tells us that revenue is 100, okay? And expenses are 75. So we'll subtract from 75, okay? We can then solve for net income being 25 here, okay? And move on to part B. It helps to solve these in order because we use each of the prior components and the next components, because as we talked about, these financial statement items are related in each of the financial statements, okay? The next one, part B, asks us to solve for retained earnings. Again, we're still on Amazing Corp here, okay? So part B solves for retained earnings. Well, we need the beginning balance plus net income minus dividends, and that'll give us the ending balance here. Well, the beginning balance that we have here is 30. They're given that. That is the item that indicates retained earnings at the beginning of the year. Then we need to add net income. Well, net income we just solved for, so that's 25. Okay. And then we need to subtract out dividends. Well, it gives us dividends at 10 here, leaving us with retained earnings of 45. Okay. Last part that we're asked to solve for is total assets. For total assets, we need two other components here. We need liabilities and stockholders' equity. Stockholders' equity, again, can be broken down in contributed capital and retained earnings. Retained earnings, when we're talking about stockholders' equity here, we're talking about the ending balance here. So we needed to solve for this before we could get to total assets. So for our equation, we don't know total assets, but we do know total liabilities. Total liabilities is 30. So we'll set X equal to 30 plus, now we need total stockholders' equity. Well, they don't give us total stockholders' equity, but they give us contributed capital at 5, and then we solve for end of the year retained earnings. That was 45 at the end here. So we have 50 over here. Total assets then equal 80, and we solve for the 3 parts. Does that make sense? If you have any questions how to solve for these, please let me know. You will see a similar problem show up on your test, so just depending on the version you get. So just be familiar with how to solve for these. We can then solve for the rest using the same type of equation for each one of these, okay? But I've already written them out. Same type of equations that we use, follow that same format. Your check figures are D equals 20, E equals 15, F equals 60, G equals 100, H equals 250, and I equals 700. Let me know if you have questions.